in the morning, you got me up, all cause you need to talk. To 4 in the evening, wanna break up, say that you've had enough. I'm tired of talking, again and again, argue about everything. You are my darling, this kiss and make up, I know you wanna touch. You call me every night, call me every day, I just wanna get you alone now. Trust me when I say, we gon' be okay, we just gotta boom bada boom ba. I don't wanna fight, you know that I'm right, baby let me talk to your body. We gon' be okay, hear me when I say.
Join us live in a few minutes as I begin this discussion with Ike Ogaimien as we talk about the traverses that many modern men are trying to more or less explore in this current world called America. Ike and I will be talking about the various dynamics of men of color, and we'll be talking about practical and not so practical outcomes to help young men get the desires that they want as they continue to traverse in the complexities of manhood. Let's enjoy this show. Be well.
On the shore, relentless in the war, the legions in our hearts, shed waters in our pores, the spirit and the flesh, the emotions that arrest, the cerebral will contest, propelling the unrest. Preachers and bandits with means underhanded, the teachers pedantic and lack understanding, so sweep out the sand with the broom in your hand. Stand up, make we burn Babylon, cause I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you lurking, demon searching, the spirit and the women fight the battle within. Cause I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demon searching, the spirit and the women fight the battle within. With the semblance of a blaze, with gratitude and rage, we touch another page with delirious delight, impervious to light. This vitality and might encourages the flight. Preachers and bandits with means underhanded, the teachers pedantic and lack understanding, so sweep out the sand with the broom in your hand. Stand up, make we burn Babylon, cause I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demon searching, the spirit and the women fight the battle within. Cause I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demon searching, the spirit and the women fight the battle within. But the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demon searching, the spirit and the women fight the battle within. Cause I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demon searching, the spirit and the women fight the battle within. Gen of iniquity, vicinity no pretty, calamity if it hit we any moment, what's a pity. Tomorrow never certain, what draws behind the curtain, the face of evil smirking, with that shifty eyes averting. It's not a steady bubble, that either pop or topple, many will fall and stumble, let the dozers gather rubble. From LA to Colorado, Guinea to Burkina Faso, cannons will breach the towers and the troops will storm the castle. Hey, I say, run, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. I say, run, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. With the rubble steady rising, and hearts are compromising. Convictions here are stifling, making evil appetizing. The fists are steady forming, and countenance is falling. Defenses are withdrawing, possibilities are falling. In these your circumstances, evil will make advances. Pick up your sword and lances, and be sure to take your stances. Victory is never promised, the battle is upon us. Gather the brave and honest, and the righteous in your corners.
We would all like to move towards our notion of the good life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, dying a hero's death, a warrior's death, and going to Valhalla, whatever it may be. We all have preferred states, preferred outcomes, preferred behaviors and modalities in terms of how we interact with the world and our relationships with other people and so on and so forth. Okay? But with what shall we meet these demands of our soul, these longings of our soul? This is a question that mental health practitioners concern themselves with. This is a question that philosophers concern themselves with. This is a question that we've been asking ourselves. We've been talking our way through civilization for millennia. And we intend to have this conversation today, again, continue, interject. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the kosher clinician in the house, a fellow YouTuber, and a man of many hats, including a really nice one that he has on right now. For those of you who are listening, you're missing out. You're missing out.
Thank you. Thank you, brother. Thank you, Ike.
Well, how are you doing, sir?
Well, I'm doing great, man. It's an honor. I've heard great things about you, man. You are a great man. I've followed you a couple of times. You have a generous spirit, and I'm always impressed by your valor as an engineer, but also by your valor as a man of integrity. So I'm always impressed. I've seen your work, and you've done a great work.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. That's very kind and generous of you.
Yes, sir.
So, let's get right into the meat and potatoes of this. Okay, I would like to kind of state at the onset this idea here of shall we call it talk therapy?
Yes, sir.
Whether it be at the confessional, right, with a priest, or whether it be, relieving oneself by sharing a burden to a close family member or so on and so forth, or whether it be a more communal situation where you go talk to the village elder, right? That kind of a thing. Now, this thing is kind of ubiquitous. It's all over human. It has been all over human civilizations of all kinds, of all modes, all through history. Now, why do you think it works? And what exactly is going on there? If we just kind of broadly speaking, this kind of idea of talking, this therapeutic effect of talking.
Well, human beings are social creatures. We're social creatures. We've always been that way. Before we came to the epigenesis of civilization, most human beings were more or less, how can I say it, in tribes. So, talking is essential to fortifying the mind. And when a person doesn't have the essence of having that tribe or those social elements, not only do they become isolated, but they become broken because they don't get the outcomes that they so deserve. So that's very essential because that's part of our biological makeup.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you take it down to that tribal instinct, and
yes.
Okay, so because there seems to be two aspects of it. Okay, one is in that sense of, let's say, a sense of let's say you are initiated into some kind of a secret situation, shall we say, not but you're initiated via some rites and so on and so forth into some kind of a group that swears an oath of secrecy, and you guys for that reason have a strong bond, okay, because of that kind of a thing. Or there is an aspect of a very much a group aspect of it in terms of us telling each other certain things and talking things through with ourselves. It's almost like it makes the change that needs to happen easier when you have someone else there or the group to guide you through it, right?
Right.
But then there's the aspect of the change, which means there needs to be actual decisions made, a wisdom applied to the situation, right? So you go to the village elder or whomever, and well, there's one aspect where you're just talking, you're just kind of offloading on somebody. But with the village elder aspect, there is the wisdom aspect too, right? So where does that come from? Where does that come in?
So are you asking me where does it come in to make sure I'm hearing you clear? Are you asking me where does it come in to get solace from the village elder? Or so,
as in, where exactly do we get the let me put it this way.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
We are after certain ends when it comes to health in general. It's more like engineering than science.
Right.
In the sense that we have outcomes that we're after, preferred states, preferred behaviors, outcomes out there in the world, right? So we have these categories that we put things into. Let's say we put all these symptoms into a particular categories because we want to do something with it, not necessarily because of the ontological truth of it or something like that, but we're trying to do something. It's engineering. But what blueprint are we engineering based on, right? So it's like, there is the aspect of, you could just talk to somebody and you feel better. But also there's the aspect of this person giving you judgments or guiding your judgments in a particular path. Now, this second aspect, which is more variable, perhaps, where, what are your thoughts as to that aspect? Are we all singing from the same hymnal these days? Or which hymnal do you sing from? If I'm making sense, I guess.
Well, I'm singing from the hymnals based on what Shakespeare said, "To thy own self be true." That's the hymnal that I'm singing for, and I think that comes into fruition once you do the shallow work and the introspection, which more or less helps you to see the dynamics of the things that you're struggling with. See, we live in a society, Ike, when many people have more or less been bombarded by what I call more or less following others instead of having a personality or having an ideal outside of other human beings. So when you're true to yourself, and when you learn to circumnavigate all those various barriers and dimensions that more or less cause many people to be afflicted because they don't have the confidence to be true to themselves, those people don't get the outcomes that they want because they don't do the work. But see, I try to teach clients that they have to do shallow work. They have to do the internal work, which is an internal dialogue about understanding those schemas or those negative thoughts that they're actually having, so they can move forward in a positive direction. So that's what I believe in. To thy own self be true. And when you're true to yourself, then you begin to get those outcomes incrementally because of that.
Good. So I would like to just so like let me see if I understand here. Is there some kind of a journey inward implied here? You mentioned shadow work, and you also mentioned to thy own self be true. So is there an idea that in there lie the answers somehow?
Yes, I've heard a famous guy. He said he often says the truth is within, and so there are 4 dimensions in clinical therapy called the Johari Window. There's the known self, the public self, the private self, and the unknown self. But there are dimensions to the psyche of a man that can cause him to have a pathology if he is not cognizant of those things that are impacting him in a negative way. So when people are more intuitive and they're willing to be in solace and be quiet, and when they do the shallow work, meaning they work with a licensed therapist to look at those dimensions of themselves that they are not aware of, that's where they start having what I call more salient outcomes. But those outcomes cannot be salient until they're willing to do the work and to introspect. Michael Jackson said it, Ike, better than I could say it. He said, I'm looking at the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. But many people can't look in the mirror because they are afraid of what they might see. You know, there's such thing called mirror therapy. They are afraid of what they might see. And because of that, it might cause them to have a conniption because they're not ready to accept the challenges of the darkness that lies within the soul. So that shallow work is essential to getting the outcomes they want to get as it relates to long-term sustainability, but also as it relates to the efficacy of that person. And that the word efficacy is a fancy way of saying functioning.
So you talk about functionality right there, and you talk about getting the certain kinds of outcomes.
Right.
There's certain kinds of adjustments that need to be made, and there's certain difficulties, shall we say, impediments to making those adjustments.
Right.
And perhaps you're referring to one of those impediments being that they're not willing to look into presumably the darkness within, right?
Right.
Now, what is your note? Because one path could say, let's say, right, regarding the darkness now, okay? So regarding that darkness, one could say that it's only darkness when kind of viewed from the outside, and that the whole point of shadow work is to go into the darkness to realize that, well, to make it not dark anymore. What any more things to say about the darkness is really the question, and I just kind of gave a notion, broadly speaking, about why or my kind of view of shadow work being about going in there, so it's no longer darkness.
So you're asking me specifically, why is it essential to go within to find out what's going on? Is that what you're asking me, Ike?
You could take it the way of, why are people afraid to see that darkness, right? that you mentioned. So what exactly, what is that? What is the diagnosis there? Because presumably people are having issues because they cannot go there. But presumably also there are people whom can go there and therefore have no issues.
Right.
The people whom are afraid to go there, what do they say, or what does the literature say about that? What's the general wisdom about why people don't want to go there to see that thing, whatever it
well, there is a myriad of dimensions. You know, some of it is psychosocial stages of development. That's part of it. But also, it's also based on the temperament of that individual. The temperament plays a role in the sustainability of that person. The temperament plays a role. And so sometimes a person cannot go within because they are afraid of what they might see. Some people can't go within because some people have personality disorders. They have what's called a fragmented schema. You know, a schema is a fixated mindset, but I created a term called a schema affliction because that fixation, regardless of what it is, has led them to fear. Therefore, they don't want to look within. People that have personality disorders often develop what's called an alter ego. They develop an alter ego to hide or more or less cover the pain of the successive stage they never more or less overcame in childhood. And that's why empathy is so important. And it's so important that each person go through what I call their successive stages of development. You know, in Hinduism, I believe in the Christian edict, but in Eastern religion, there's a such thing called a karmic cycle, where a person is constantly trying to refine and redefine themselves. But until they go do that, but many people end up going through that karmic cycle trying to find purging or redefinition. But many people go within it because they feel like they can never be perfect. But you have to go through the cycles of despair in order to become a better person. In the edicts of theology, the Bible said that gold without fire, would never be pure gold. So you have to become purified. That's why I came up with the title, The Kosher Clinician. Because if it ain't 7, it ain't kosher. If it ain't kosher, it ain't right. A person have to go through 7 stages, especially as it relates to masculinity, 7 stages in order to become optimized. And see, I decided to do the show, Ike, The Kosher Clinician, because in clinical social work, a lot of times people do not address the psychopathology of men, especially Black men. So as a clinical therapist, I took it upon myself to use a ego defense mechanism called sublimation. Sublimation clearly means to take something negative, and turn it into something good. So I used the kosher clinician to create something called a group catharsis, where men can congregate and talk and share their pain without shame or subterfuge. So yeah, so I hope that answers your question more or less. I know I was a little esoteric, but
no, we're definitely getting there. Because,
no doubt.
And for the purposes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to those in the chat. And please go ahead and make sure you smash the like button. And one of the moderators, go out there and get the channel of the Kosher Clinician and go ahead and drop it in the chat. Okay, go ahead and spam it and go ahead and subscribe to the brother. Now, just kind of see where we've been hovering over. There's this general idea, which I think we both agreed on, a premise that there's an engineering aspect to this, and this is not a science, if you will. This is not some kind of a, well, I know for sure. In other words, it's even unfair to call it to get into the whole science thing. It's an engineering thing, especially reverse engineering, because you came and you found, if you talk about health in general, right?
Right.
You came and you find here the human body and the human psyche, and you're trying to reverse engineer it based on certain outcomes that you would like. And you're kind of doing the best you can, and you improve. And there are various modalities that have existed over time, and just trying to get to the idea of, you know, what will be there for the guiding star. And we've gotten so far, the going within, the shadow work, the purification, all those kinds of things which have to do with seeing the certain kinds of dark aspects of ourselves, or whatever. And whatever is dark would simply means more or less what we don't want to see, right? What we'd rather not acknowledge about ourselves, correct?
Right.
Okay. And those, okay. So those things are there, and they are perhaps the source of pathology themselves. Now, I was going to get into now from a different direction in terms of why psychology, because you kind of mentioned the psychopath pathology of men not being addressed. Perhaps was that one of the reasons why you went into the field, or were you trying to, what problems are you trying to solve? What interests and what outcomes are you trying to see, if you will?
Well, you know, I knew Ike when I was 9 or 11 that I was going to be a counselor of some sort. You know, I'm a Leo. So if you know anything about Leos bring sunshine. You know, we love to help and we love to fix people. But I've always known that it was my calling, my purpose to inspire and to help people. You know, I love seeing people happy. I love putting a smile on people's face. But it became into fruition later on back in 2008, 2009 when I taught school. I never thought my path, even though I knew I was a counselor and a teacher, I never knew that it would go towards becoming a clinical therapist. But when I was in school or when I taught special education, I knew at that point that it would become essential to more or less get out and become a therapist, because I just felt like a lot of times Black boys and Latin boys in school didn't get the proper outcomes that they deserve. So I decided to matriculate at UNC Chapel Hill. I got my master's back in 2012. I got an MSW, which is a master's in social work, but I got I'm licensed, so I'm a licensed clinical social worker with the ability to do many things. But my background is very diverse. Law enforcement, I've taught school, and now a clinical therapist. So my background is very diverse. But to answer your question, I always knew I had a burning flame within to inspire and help people. And I just took it to the next level. I never knew I could go this far in life, but, you know, I'm a go-getter. I work hard. I have a puritanical work ethic. And it just came into fruition. You know, so, there's an old saying that says the virtue of success is preparation plus opportunity equals success. And so I was prepared and I took the opportunity. So therefore I become successful, but I had to be very strategic about it. So hopefully that answers your question.
I see. Now, do you have any reasons or what? So two things here. What's the diagnosis? Okay, you say the psychopathology is not being addressed. And also there is psychopathology that is not getting certain outcomes. So what is the diagnosis of the psychopathology? We're talking communal now, because question generally is kind of what motivated you, and you related to the fact that there is and you do want to help people. So I get it. I get the picture. It's because obviously people come from different perspectives, if you will, and therefore they become rather more skilled or have a more sharpened lens when it comes to that perspective. So you, from the perspective of the group, right? The group that you're concerned with. You said African-American boys, Latin boys, and so on and so forth, that there is an issue. What is the issue, right? If you're focusing on it as opposed to others not focusing on it, what is the issue and how could it be remedied, or what are some of the root causes, if you will?
Well, simple. The diagnosis of the pathology is this, Ike. You know, you grew up in Nigeria. It was a group in the communal culture. It's fatherlessness is one, and it's the lack of, and it's also social neglect. Those are the two pathologies that we have: fatherlessness and social neglect. When you blend those two elements together, you have chaos, because men bring order, we bring structure, we bring clarity, and we give definition. In theology, Jacob, when he wrestled with the angel, he said, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. And his name went from Jacob to Israel. And so fathers give direction, fathers give purpose, fathers give clarity, but fathers also give instruction. And so we have a very cynical pathology in our communities because fathers are absent because of how some of our women, and I say some, have been indoctrinated to more or less exclude the importance of having men in their homes and also, Ike, in their lives. So that's the diagnosis of the pathology.
Okay, so the diagnosis of the pathology is fatherlessness, therefore no structure,
and social neglect, of not only men, but boys too. Yes, sir.
Let's take a step back behind the curtains of this social neglect aspect. Are you saying, because you mentioned, I grew up in Nigeria, communal aspect. So you're saying that this neglect of the communal life, if you will, and this is kind of where we kind of started with that whole thing about being comfortable in this cocoon of community such that problems can be addressed. But are you saying that in modern times, okay, and perhaps I shouldn't be asking it, but because there already is a thesis out there that says in modern times there's more of an individualistic aspect to life, for good or for ill, right?
Yeah, right.
With its benefits and its drawbacks, and there is less of scaffolding, meaning tradition-wise, and so on and so forth. That Friedrich Nietzsche came a while ago and then announced to us the death of God, which was like a news report saying this is how society is now. Okay, that glue there is not holding it anymore, and people now are, shall we say, having a meaning crisis, if you will, and so on and so forth. Right now, are you saying that part of it is really this neglect of the communal, or what you're calling social neglect? Elaborate more on this social neglect aspect.
Well, it's neglect of the communal, but the social neglect, Ike, is something that you never experienced in your culture, but something the American men experience. They don't experience the importance of reverence and honor. Theology say, honor thy father and thy mother. But many men in America do not get the proper honor and reverence that's necessary to help them become sustainable as men. Men have an internal dialogue within, Ike, that more or less says, if you empower me, then I will empower you. If I empower you, then I will empower the community. If I empower the community, therefore I will empower the nation. And so you got a generation of men that are not empowered, therefore they can't empower you, they can't empower the children, and the show hill can't empower the community. So what I'm saying is that when you socially neglect men and you raise the other gender at the behest of men, it becomes social neglect. And listen, that social neglect is multidimensional and also multifaceted on many levels. It's just not limited to individualism, but it's multifaceted on many levels.
So, therefore, there are specific challenges, because I started this off with the idea that we all have preferred states. We all have a Valhalla, a heaven, a life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, the good life image, whatever it may be. And there are obstacles and there are also means of, vis-a-vis this good life, obstacles to getting there, means of getting there, so on and so forth. And then the milieu that we're in, the system, the society, the culture, so on and so forth, provides, shall we say, special help or special hindrances, right, depending on the times we live in. Right. So what are some of the special hindrances in today's day? Because you just mentioned that it's multifaceted, that the individualism aspect, perhaps the political landscape, that's one thing. What are some of the other particular hindrances that the modern landscape offers to us finding our souls, as I say over there, or also getting the reverence, or all those things you said? Like, what are these dimensions? You said multidimensional, if you don't mind.
Well, one is the dissolvement of spirituality. In clinical therapy, we talked about 4 dimensions, Ike, because human beings are what I call integrated beings. They're integrated. They are bio, which is body, psycho, which is mind, social, which is an environment, but also spiritual. I'm 43% Nigerian based on my bloodline. I didn't know it, but when I did my DNA ancestry, I'm 43% Nigerian. When you go into cultures that some actually consider to be third world, those cultures tend to be more intact mentally because they have a spiritual dimension that gives them peace and solace. But we live in a very postmodern society and a postmodern culture that says your truth is your truth and my truth is my truth. And when you have those, what I call social or spiritual fragmentations, it causes confusion. And it goes back to the term I created called, once again, a schema affliction, but also it can cause cognitive distortions, meaning catastrophizing, magnification, minimalization. It can cause cognitive distortions or cognitive dissonance where the person is not aware of the things that are going on inside their head. So the absence of spirituality in my mind has been the greatest catalyst to the fragmentation of many people because it leaves them soulless. Human beings, theologians say that man cannot live by bread alone. So it basically means that you just can't live by eating food, but you got to have that spiritual component as well. You can feed the body, but if you're not feeding the soul and spirit, then you will become fragmented. Give an example. In clinical psychology or clinical therapy, there was a study where they gave an example of a baby. One baby, Ike, was giving food, nurturing, and given a safe environment. But the other baby, Ike, was giving food, but it was not giving nurture. So guess what happened? The baby that was giving the nurturing and all the dimensions of things that are needed to be sustainable actually lived because it was the bio was taken care of, the cycle which was nurturing was taken care of, but also the spirit. But the baby that only got the bio actually died. So human beings are dying because they're not getting the spiritual things they need in order to become sustainable long term.
Okay, I see. So I like the scheme. No pun intended. I like the scheme of the schema, the fragmentation that you mentioned. So
right,
without this cohesive spiritual, and obviously, so okay, without the spirituality being handled cohesively, as in without this your truth, his truth, postmodernism, it's all about power games and so on and so forth. Without that, there will be fragmentation in individuals, okay, writ large. Not that everybody is going to equally, or shall we, let me put it this way. And perhaps maybe we're getting, maybe I'm missing the mark here with this particular subtlety. Are there people whom are more disposed to be able to ride chaos, whereby, oh, your truth, my truth, so on and so forth, I can still handle it. I can handle the seeming cognitive dissonance in my environment. I can hold my center. And are there people whom are less so? One would assume that the middle is people whom, that many people will get afflicted by the environment. And what are these traits? Can we develop them? Can we go exercise our immunity to, shall we say, the chaos out there in the world? Or
right.
So
So Ike, there's a such thing called resiliency theory. And based on resiliency theory, some people actually become proponents of doom based on life circumstance. But with resiliency theory, with some people, they actually supersede, even though they're in what's called decadent environments. It's called intrinsic, meaning within, and extrinsic motivation. A lot of times are the elements that more or less determine how far people will go in life. I'll give you an example. I grew up in a very rural country, part of the United States. Who would ever thought I would have ascended at the level that I would? Because based on the odds, I shouldn't have gotten as far as I've gotten. But you cannot measure the heart of a man. You can't measure the heart of a man. And as I once said, preparation plus opportunity equals success. When I was in undergraduate, Dr. Robert Creasy said, when the window of opportunity presents itself, kick the door down. So just like a lion in the Serengeti that's waiting for its prey, I'm always in the field, waiting for the opportunity to become successful. And that's me in a nutshell. Resiliency theory says that some people will supersede even in negative environments, but some become victims of their own afflictions because they lack the proper coping skills. So some of it is temperament, some of it is socialization. It's a myriad of factors because the human beings have so many different layers, but so many different complexities.
Okay, let's pick a hard one, if you will, like a solid one. Let's talk about physical health and its correlation to mental health, right?
Right.
Many things that we can immediately see. We intuitively see the connection, right? You know,
Right.
you exercise, you're stress-free, you got good cardiovascular thing going in there, you can deal with stress better, so on and so forth. But could you elaborate more on that? If you pick that particular dimension, what are ways, because we're talking about inoculating, immunizing ourselves, making ourselves more resilient to whatever the chaos may be outside. And we'll go outside again to talk more about what exactly it is, you know, these particular challenges that modernity offers to us, right? But what can we do physically in order to make ourselves more mentally resilient and functional?
Well, listen, that's an excellent question. You know, in clinical therapy, we talk about something called a psychosomatic response. It's mind over body, body over mind. The most important factor that a lot of people are suffering from, is the lack of sleep. You know, in Hebrew, 7 means complete. So on the 7th day, God rested. He rested. He looked at his creation, because a man's purpose is his creation. And I'm guilty of it. But on the 7th day, because 7 is kosher, he rested. And so I would say the absence of sleep is one of the greatest detriments to the destabilization of the body of a man. Now, of course, exercise play a role, eating a clean diet, drinking plenty of water. But the number one element to the sustainability of the soul, mind, and spirit is rest. And see, we live in a very decadent society, Ike, where most people don't rest. My granddad, you know, he was a farmer, and he would go to bed, Ike, a lot of times around 9 o'clock and get up in the dawn of the day. And so there's science behind going to bed early, but also getting up early. Not only are you more productive, but your testosterone levels are higher. Men now have the testosterone levels of an old man because they're not getting their rest. Your body cannot recalibrate itself until you get sustainable rest. So just like Elohim, God, Yahweh, Yeshua, Jesus, whatever you want to call him. I believe you call him Yeshua or Yahweh, Elohim. He rested on the 7th day because he saw his purpose in 6 days, but he said 7 days I must rest. So if the eternal flame, which is God, must rest, what should you and I do as men?
So rest is the number one thing. That it is. There is a book I recently got on Audible that I listened to a while ago. The name escapes me now, but on sleep, just the importance of it. I think it cannot be overstated, right? And when you look at the ways in which it's very damaging not to sleep, or the essentiality of it, if you will, and so on and so forth. Okay, so now while we stay in this kind of we talk, because we're talking now about physical health, and you say sleep is a major one. Okay. One can make analogies between physical health and mental health.
Right.
One is there such a thing, for example, as a good mental diet, right? Purely mental, like what one takes in and what one should not take in, right? Being nutritious or not nutritious,
right?
In terms of it may be social media, or it may be through other forms of media into getting into one's mind.
Right.
Well, any thought about mental diet and its significance?
Right. Well, you're asking some very poignant but also very purposeful questions, and because of that, it's imperative that I become intentional. Now, listen. There was a rice study done, Ike, back in the day by the doctor, name was Dr. Iramoto. He was Dr. Iramoto. I can't think of his name. And so he had 3 containers, 3 containers of rice, right? And in all those containers, the containers that got neglect actually turned black, I believe. The container that actually got cussing and fussing and yelling and screaming and hollering, it began to decay as well. But the container that got music, positive words of affirmation, it actually became neutralized, or actually was healthy. So human beings operate on a frequency or a channel. We are psychosomatic beings, but also we have a what's called a spark. We have our vibrations are electricity. And so when we're around toxic vampires or people with a lot of toxicity, it can destroy us from within. So the mental diet that you need to use as it relates to exercise and holistic health is actually being around people that are peaceful, people that are kind, and people that bring forth good vibrations. The gospel say, whatever a man think, that's what he is. So when you're thinking and you make your body become a vessel of darkness, then that's what you will become. So it's essential to more or less eradicate those people in your life that more or less don't give you the potent outcomes that you need in order to become a better person. So yes, a diet that you need a diet that's more or less free of what I call toxic GMOs, because a lot of human beings in this day and age have toxic GMOs. So yes.
Mm-hmm. So the mental diet aspect, staying away from that which is going to be draining
Yes.
to you,
right?
In terms of your motivation, in terms of your energy, that which
Right.
is not productive,
Mhm.
and so on and so forth.
Right.
And there are many ways in which this, because again, let me harken back to the point, ladies and gentlemen. We already agreed that the practice of mental health is very much a practice game. In other words, it is not a science. It's not a place where we're going to look for absolute ontological categories. We're looking for something that works, and it has to work in to get certain outcomes against certain realities that are out there. For example, we talk about the reality of that causes fragmentation in the postmodern world, right? So what works, right, against that? How, rather, anyways, and what we know, what I'm basically saying here is that the idea of being staying away from people, whether you call them psychic vampires, or you just call it negative people,
Right.
or you call it people with a fixed mindset, or, and the fact that your intuition and your feelings tell you when you're in that room and somebody who comes in who's a downer and kills the whole thing, right? Or whether you're the one doing it to your own self. We all know this, and we all know the negative impacts of it. And we all know that, just like the kind of physical analogy, you would not keep on going back to that bowl of porridge if it makes you sick all the time, right? So don't do the same thing. Now, let me pause here for a second. There's a neglect of spirituality in the West, shall we say? Well, let's not say the West. Let's just say modernity. We've been talking about the special hindrances that modernity has in our way in terms of meeting the certain outcomes that we have, preferred states, the demands of our soul, if you will. One of the challenges is we have lost access to the idea of the spiritual. Now, I'm as much of a modern man as anybody,
right,
in terms of my approach to thinking and being and so on and so forth. However, I know that spirituality can be recovered, right, simply by understanding that it really is it consists in the question of consciousness, okay, and that is what we've neglected. So people in the modern time, when they hear the word spirituality, right, let's be honest, what happens, right? They go, oh, some woo stuff, right? Eyes glaze over, like, oh, what are you trying to, some snake oil getting sold over here, right? And I say, okay, the first step, and perhaps it may be the only step you have to take for certain types of people, because again, I'm glad that you mentioned that temperament is always an important factor, right? So the important first step for someone like me is to just recover the idea that, no, this is a question of consciousness. This is a question of your subjective consciousness, subjectivity, and so on and so forth. The scientific method removes consciousness, objectivity, and by definition, that's what it's also good for. But because we have removed subjectivity, we've put it away almost like, oh, we'll deal with that later. Let everything be matter and material. Let everything be stuff that we can measure, push around, hit with a hammer, and count, right? That kind of a thing. And as a result, we don't know what we're doing in the world of consciousness anymore.
Right.
We get all wacky and weird, right? So, and if it can also manifest itself in terms of mental disease, if you will, and disorder and distress, even more so the reason why we should go back and focus on this thing, which we have perhaps demeaned and relegated to the back. Now I feel like I'm on a soapbox, okay? But that's my own personal, crusade in terms of look, the spirituality thing really is a question that hasn't gone away, Mr. Modern Man. And if you don't understand how to use modern language and modern frames of thought to recapture the idea of looking at consciousness and its requirements, then you're lost. I don't know if you had any comments about that whole stream of consciousness there.
Well, that's fine. Listen, there's a type of therapy called logotherapy, right? And it was by a famous guy by the name of Viktor Frankl. And Viktor Frankl, he was placed in a very precarious predicament where he was placed in the concentration camps during World War II. But Viktor Frankl had a mindset similar to what the Apostle Paul had, that whatever state that I'm in, I will learn how to become content. Now, Viktor Frankl was in a situation where most people would have died. But Viktor Frankl learned how to be content, even though he was in chaos and pain, because he was in concentration camps. But he learned to more or less focus on the things that he can't control, and the things that he can't control, he just didn't stress himself out about it. We have a generation now, because of technology, we've lost some of those what I call arcane virtues, like patience, perseverance, and long suffering. And because we've lost those arcane virtues, we have created a society that does not have the proper or healthy coping skills to become sustainable with life challenges. You know, I look back and I'm grateful that all the things that I struggled with as a man, I actually went through it. You know, Roberta Flack made a song back in the day called "Do the Fire, Do the Limit, Do the Wall." And I've been through the fires of life. And because of going through the fire, you know, I'm a better man. When you look at my channel art, you see that skeva in Hebrew.
If you don't mind, okay,
right.
giving us
right.
and this is probably a crazy way to interject this point here, because you've mentioned it a couple of times now about your life and anyways, maybe it was when we were talking on the phone. My bad. In terms of you, but you brought up this idea of having gone through adversity, right?
Right.
You talk about going through the fire, right? And well, if you don't mind sharing, you know, in the manner in which you would wish to share some of the trials, tribulations, and any lessons that you got out of it in your life.
Well, listen, you know, Clint Black made a song back in the day. He said, "I'm going to leave here a better man." He was a country star singer. You know, listen, you never know how far you can go into life until you get into the fire of life. And, you know, I've been through some very precarious things. You know, I'm a black man. I'm 6'5", 6'6" with shoes on. You know, I'm very masculine. And, you know, and I'm very educated. You know, so a lot of times men of my ilk often become, you know, challenged or berated because I've always gotten the foolish gestures. You know, you're intimidating because I'm 6'6", 6'5". Or they make stupid notions, you know, you're very articulate. So, you know, I've lost jobs, not because I did anything wrong, but I've lost jobs because I stood on my convictions as a man. So I consider myself an iconoclast to some, but I consider myself a man of virtue to many. It just depends on how you look at me. Some see me as an iconoclast because they don't understand who I am as a man. But to those that are wise, they will see me as a man of virtue. So I've been through many precarious things in life, but you know, the way I've overcome it is by being persistent. I'm very persistent. I'm not a quitter. There have been some times when I've been through pain. I've been through a lot of pain in different aspects of my life. Some were actually trauma, but because I went through the fire, I'm a better man now. And anytime I can talk to the other men, I can share with them about some of the many traverses of life, and let them know that there is progress if they process through the pain. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, that is a very good. I like the way you answered it. So you talk about the coping skills. Okay. If one were to just kind of put a philosophical label on things, we would say, let's say, Stoicism, right?
Yes.
And because Stoicism, generally speaking, is that it's a man's philosophy. What does that mean? Well, you're doing manly things if you're hunting out there in the Serengeti, or if you're a hunter, right? Or if you are doing, or if you're in the war in the foxhole or something, or doing something dangerous, you're going to come up with certain kinds of you're going to come up with a version of Stoic philosophy, right? That's kind of like the idea is that, okay, every hunter gatherer, right? Every band of hunters was a Stoic, because it's about, well, you know, the rain and the desert and the animals and so on and so forth, and hunger don't give a F about your feelings, right?
Right.
What kind of philosophy do you need to have in order to exist in that world? It is that of Stoicism. Now, now you how much of that is important? What I mean is the actual knowledge, the notions, the maxims, if you will, in terms of teaching people, oh, this is how the world actually is. In other words, taking the serenity prayer, right? You know, the wisdom to recognize the difference between that which you can and cannot control, and so on and so forth. Taking that and packaging it up and giving it to somebody in a way that they can kind of get it. How important is that aspect, the knowledge aspect, if you will, the philosophy aspect?
So you mean the knowledge of being a Stoic? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, in other words, in order to transmit, in order to help, which is your specialty, how much of this kind of how much of a philosophy dosage is needed, right?
Well, I think a good healthy dose of stoicism is actually vital. I think most modern men are actually too emotional. Men of old, I had to have a level, like my granddad and great granddad, they didn't show a lot of emotion because stoicism is what helped them complete their purpose or their mission. A man that's too caught up in emotionalism actually become a victim of his own masculinity. So a healthy dose of stoicism is necessary. Now watch this. Many men have got caught up, Ike, in the modern notion of love. And, when you look at the word love, they say, I fell in love. And so it's almost like, what's the word? Like self-fulfilling prophecy. When a man falls in love, he becomes a victim of his own psychosis. And so when men focus on their purpose and when they focus on their mission in life, if the person or the woman that they're with no longer loves them, they're fine. Because their epigenesis is not the woman and her feelings, but their epigenesis is their purpose. And when their epigenesis is more or less sustainable or tied into their purpose, they did not become a victim of the psychosis of love. So in order to not become a victim of that psychosis, a healthy dose of stoicism is important. There's an old saying, Ike, that say that all fun and no play make Jack a dull boy. And so sometimes it's important to be dull in life, stoic.
So you're preaching to the choir right now, and
Right.
some people might come at us and say, hey, that is a temperamental thing, because I've kind of I'm one of those that you may just kind of look at, and over time you observe me and you can say, oh, well, you kind of have a natural knack for stoicism, it's your personality and so on and so forth, And even if you use the Big Five or MBTI or whatever, you kind of, okay, you same thing over and over, that kind of a guy, right? But I don't know if you have any notions as to that, as to it help. Let's bring it in, because you mentioned temperament. Let's not bring in that factor, that parameter, and how it varies. Like, how, for example, would temperament affect the dosage of stoicism that one should or should not exhibit, or what's kind of considered okay, or is it kind of our particular bias? Is stoicism our bias, people whom are built the way we are built?
Well, let me ask you this question. What month were you born?
March.
March what?
31st.
Oh, so you're Aries. You're a man of fire. Mr. Prometheus. You're the fire god. I'm a Leo. So if you know anything about Aries and Leos, we're fiery. We're passionate about life. Now, listen, I'm not one to necessarily push the constellation of the zodiac. I think some people are predestined to be stoic. Capricorns are like that. They're very pragmatic. They're about business. But I would say, yes, there are some people that have genetic predispositions towards stoicism. I think some are victims of their genetics. It's called nature versus nurture, nature versus nature, or what's called biological predisposition. Those elements play a role in the psychodynamics of a person. But also trauma can cause a person to be stoic. It means they instead of them projecting out, they revert within and they build what's called rigid boundaries because of the pain of the pathology that they went through. So yes, some people are more or less cursed to stoicism. Also it's based on where you're from, based on your region. You're from Nigeria. I would say some of the Nigerian elders are very stoic. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, you're not wrong.
Right. They can come off as somewhat stoic or very, distant. So it's life, circumstances, culture, faith. It's a myriad of factors that can cause a person to have elements of stoicism.
So on that analogy that we were on between physical health and mental health, okay, because we kind of talked about a mental diet, and perhaps we talked about mental exercise and strength,
right,
and via experience also as well, and kind of talked a little bit about, well, maybe is there a wisdom aspect, and you say, well, healthy dose of stoicism is required. Now let's talk about, is there such a thing as a pathogen in the world of in the world of ideas, in the world of consciousness, in the world of the psyche, in the world of the soul, right? Is there such a thing as a pathogen? For example, we already talked about the diet, right? Things come into you and you should give, but are there things that you should you don't want them in there? They're all bad.
So yes, excellent question. Is there a pathogen in the soul of men? And I would say unequivocally, yes. The edicts of theology, Ike, says this, that the soul that sinned shall surely die. Adam was the first victim of the pathology of the soul because he did not more or less live up to the mandates of Yahweh. So the soul that sins shall surely die. So yes, there is a pathology of the soul called original chaos or original sin, if you believe in the teachings of the Judeo-Christian fabric. So yes, it's called sin.
So is there a way of, in the world, sifting out that pathology, either the increase of it or is it a predetermined as an original sin, and therefore nothing can be done but for grace, if you will?
Well, listen, it depends on what worldview you believe in. If you believe in what's called Calvinism or Arminianism, it just depends on which philosophical branch you believe in. The Calvinists believe that some are predestined to eternal judgment. It's nothing they can do. But the Arminian believe that God gives every man free will. So it depends on your theological branch. It depends on your theological predilection. Some believe in what's called, dispensationalism, where God actually dealt with different men at different periods of time to bring forth grace. So it just depends on the philosophy. There's so many floating philosophy and competing philosophies in faith and also in science that, you have to pick one that more or less makes more sense. But that comes with a keen eye, and it means you have to be very studious and more or less looking through using a fine-tooth comb to more or less clear out that social fragmentation, to say the least.
And before let me go ahead and address the super chat. Thank you very much, Mr. Adult Supervision in the building. Okay, and we got another one coming up. So Mr. Adult Supervision says, okay, key point. Okay, he says key point, ladies and gentlemen. People realizing they have neglected the aspect of being for deranged religion of exclusionary focus on quantitative matters, tool and purpose. So quantitative matters, and yes, we'll talk about that in a second. There's an exclusion again of the consciousness aspect of and then creating this mind-body duality, for example, right, as a tentative solution to a problem that doesn't even exist, is what I would say. But thank you very much. And we have another super chat. Says, great show. The Kosher Clinician is providing excellent information, and the questions are great. Well, thank you very much for the $20 super chat, Dr. Omolade McCoy, a Nigerian name. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. That puts you in the sponsorship category. Now, if we take a step back to the previous super chat regarding the kind of neglect of the subjective, now the reason why, because you distinguish between the soul and the spiritual. Would you mind telling us what that distinguishing is or consists in?
Well, the soul is the faculty as it relates to the emotions of a man. The spirit is what amplifies the vibration of the soul. I'm going to say it again. The soul is the emotions that are more or less encapsulated in the spirit. Now, it's going to be a little technical when I say this, but almost like spermatozoa. The sperm is within the semen, but the semen is the carrier and the sperm is the essence. And so it's that essence that amplifies the motility of that sperm cell. So when they are pulled apart, then there is chaos. And so because we're integrated beings, soul, mind, body, and spirit, when either part is not calibrated, there's an internal conflict in that struggle. When all elements of the body are calibrated, then there's something called fusion. It's called fusion. But when it's not calibrated, it's called fragmentation. And because of that fragmentation, the word that I created, schema, is cognitive behavioral therapy, meaning a thought pattern. But when it's not fragmented, it becomes a schema, thought pattern, negative or positive, but mostly negative, but become an affliction based on the pain of the past or fear. So it becomes a schema affliction. And many people, Ike, are going through schema afflictions because of unresolved issues from the past.
So the breath of life, the fire, the animating force, right? The anima, or the spirit, right? And the reason I'm doing this is just to kind of, because it's important to make these distinctions. And I think it's the issue with that, I would say, at least for someone like me, whom would come to the questions of spiritual matters, is the definitions of words and the ideas of the game that one is playing, the language games one is playing when one speaks about certain things is important, right? You cannot use ancient words as though you understood the ancient language and refuse to explain it in modern ways to modern lay people. It's not fair, if you will, almost. But so that idea of the spark, right? And then as opposed to the soul, okay? Now, when we look at what the super chat previously, this one suggests that we are not focusing on the point of subjectivity, on the point of consciousness, okay? What would it look like, okay, if in your imagination, in your world, you can look at it from the person's point of view, from the first perspective, the person whom is adequately focused on consciousness and spirituality, what does his life look like from a subjective point of view, if you will? Like what exactly does it look like, not to make the mistake that this person is pointing out to focus on the spiritual, the faculties of the spirit, if you will?
Well, listen, the question that, and I'm thank you for the adult supervision, brother, pulling that. I got an idea of what he's saying, but it's sort of vague. But in the Old Testament, it says, as a deer panteth by the water brook, so shall my soul cry for thee, O God. As this, I know some people don't more or less care for modern religion, because modern religion has caused a lot of consternation in many. I think the elements of the faith in itself are fine, but many people have used the tenets of religion, whether it be Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, to more or less subvert or control or suppress the conscience of a man. But the gospel, in my opinion, is the most red pill book that's ever been written. But back to what the adult supervision was saying, I don't quite understand what he means by what he's saying, because it's sort of vague. But I will say this: a man this balance with spirituality and spiritual truth, and when he has a greater purpose outside of his physical world, because the physical world is what we live in, then he has a greater purpose in life. When you think about our ancestors, the ones that were in America, the ones that were slaves, in the old Baptist tradition, they said, we may not understand, but we understand things better by and by. The atrocities of Black people in the South, most psychologists, also most anthropologists would say that most people will have died under those convictions. But there was a fire within the fabric of Black men and Black women that were more or less victims of chattel slavery that superseded the atrocities that were more or less impacted upon them by white progenitors that used the gospel to suppress instead of using the gospel to empower. See, Black people had a divergent view of the gospel. The white man used the gospel as a way to oppress some, because there were great people like Quakers. There was liberation theology, and there was more or less a theology of oppression. So men like Quakers, Pilgrims, and also Freedom Riders, they talked about the liberated aspect of the gospel, which was Moses. And so most Black people use that as a way to overcome the pathologies of shallow slavery. So I would say when a man is in keen of faith and spirituality and truth, he becomes an indomitable warrior. A person that can go through the fires of life and adversity unflinched, because he knows that he has a greater purpose outside of the current milieu called the material world.
So, and this is, I would say, this is where I've been. This is where we've been getting at. This is what we've been reiterating. At least in my mind, we've been reiterating the fact that something needs to be brought into this question of psychopathology.
Right.
Something needs to be brought in as a solution. Something needs to be brought in as a way, as an outcome. In other words, it's an engineering project. We are desirous of certain outcomes, certain states, certain behaviors, certain patterns, so on and so forth, right? And they have to do with the individual, its relationship with the, in other words, and our vision of what the good is, right? That's very important. We bring in the good as a yardstick, and we use it as a measure by which these adjustments need to be made to these individuals, right? And getting at what that shape of that good is what we've stated. We started out with, with the introspection and the shadow work and so on and so forth. And then we came out to define it in more terms such as spiritual. And you were saying that you'll be out there if you got that, and I was asking, like, what does it look like? And you were saying with that spiritual backing, but what does that in your life, if you don't mind making it personal, right?
No, I don't.
Where have you found your spiritual strength, if you will, in order to go out there and be a stoic in the battlefield?
Good question. Well, listen, I'm a hybrid. I got a little bit of stoicism and epicureanism. Like I say, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. So I'm a Leo. So I'm not 100% stoic. I got a little swag. I got a little swag to life. But look, I don't consider myself a savant. But when I was a child, I asked God for wisdom. I never forget, I was about 9 years old. I was sitting in my car, and I didn't ask him for a G.I. Joe. I didn't ask him for a Tonka truck. I didn't ask him for money or fame. I said, give me wisdom. And so it's the wisdom of Elohim, the wisdom of God, that's helped me to become sustainable in this current maze called life. That's what's kept me sustainable, knowing that there's an abiding faith in something greater that's outside of myself. If I didn't have that virtue of knowing that there's an eternal force that's greater than me outside of myself, I would have been a man most miserable.
That is let me see here. Before I react, let me make sure I got this. No, there's lot to ponder there. Shout out to Snuggles. Shout out to Snuggles in the building. Thank you for the $5 super chat. Thank you for the $5 super chat. Giving a shout out to, and continue to drop his link, ladies and gentlemen. Continue to drop his link. And Dr. K Polymath is asking, but there is a question that caught my eye, right? About the liberation aspect, right?
Right.
And someone saying, and perhaps I'll try to steel man what I perceive to be the argument of this person, saying that the whole Bible is liberation, that's split, and you may or may not agree with that. Is there a sense in which you could possibly agree with someone saying, oh, well, actually the whole thing, if you look at it correctly, is all liberation, right? And there is no,
Well, there's a scripture that says, who the Son sets free, he is free indeed. The gospel says, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. So I would say, based on that surface analogy, yes, it is true. The gospel is very liberating. But you can take the gospel and it can become a pariah to many if you more or less make it a subjugate to those that seek to subvert. Many prosperity preachers use the gospel as a way to subvert and to control people. But if you look at the tenets of theology for what it is, the person, Polymath, is right. It is a book of liberation. Whoever the Son sets free is free indeed. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's liberty. So yes, it is a book of liberation. It's liberation to the soul. It's water to the soul. It's pneumatic. It's pneumatic. It's the air. It's the air to the soul of man. So yes, I would say that's precisely correct. Depending on how they look at it, I don't know what their, what their underlying philosophical branches are, but in theory, obviously that's correct.
I'm gonna drop this thing here, and you're gonna need to explain yourself if you come up. Only Dr. K Polymath here. I just want to tongue in cheek, but let's see. Now, I think that from the individual perspective, you have I think I can get the picture regarding what the outcomes are that you're trying to see, the means and methods of getting there, with what, the tools, the mental disposition, so on and so forth, all the way from the philosophy that is required, the mental habits, the practices, spirituality, shadow work, so on and so forth. Now, when it comes to the societal level, okay, because remember, we were going to go back outside to talk about, the ills that are out there that are either symptomatic or the cause of issues. You mentioned something like postmodernism, for example, right? Is there anything to be done about these externalities, or all one can do is just deal with the thing and let things happen as they that there's a rhyme and reason to history. It's going to do what it's doing. You just need to fortify yourself for the times, if you will.
Right. So if you look at ancient culture, you're from Nigeria, the sages or the men of wisdom, some looked at the stars or the constellations to determine the future or to predict the future. But the sages, or more or less the savants, more or less looked at prophecy. I think when you look at it through the contextual framework of prophecy, if you believe in the edicts of theology, and some have more or less abused prophecy as well, some believe that we're heading to a cataclysm of unparalleled proportions ever in human history. And some call that the prophetic framework or a panorama of prophecy. And that panorama is shaping up now as we continue to move forward in this turbulent time called America. So I would say, if you look at certain elements of the gospel as it relates to prophecy, I think prophecy is that schematic picture that's more or less showing the emergence of something ominous on the scene, because it doesn't take a rocket science, Ike, to know that there is some social engineering going on in this society. There is a form of social chaos going on in society, and there's a fear that challenges the souls of men. So yes, I believe that the prophetic picture plays a role as it relates to the burgeoning darkness that we see in society now.
Excellent response, sir. Polymath. First of all, would you want to, you have been summoned up here, sir, in order to explain your view that the Gospels are all positive. Are you talking about holistic complementarity? What are you talking about, sir?
Well, I'm interested to see which witchcraft you use to summon me here, but I guess it's the internet.
It works.
Interesting. Yeah, so my sort of framework for this whole saying that the whole Bible is actually liberation is it. So everything that young sir stated earlier, as well as the aspect that if you look at the whole thing in context, it is all liberationary. So let's say some of the verses that the slavers utilized to justify slavery, some verses in Matthew, etc., are there. That's true. They are there saying, hey, slaves, don't be so, don't run away, don't be the worst slaves, do a good job. It never mentioned, however, that you can enslave people. It didn't say that. It was actually telling the slaves how to act while in slavery. It never said, hey, go and enslave people. In fact, if you look at the Old Testament, the law states that you are not supposed to enslave your own, meaning Christian, or in that context, or Judean. You can't do that. So, and also there's another interesting law that states if you enslave someone, you too will be a slave. This is in Revelations. So it actually adds up into a nice, tight little circle. So actually, one of the laws, which is a commandment, is if you enslave someone, you too will be a slave. In Revelation, it states this basically in the new heaven that everything's going to go around. If you live by the sword, you'll die by the sword. If you enslave someone, you too will be a slave, whatever that means. So actually, yeah, looking at the whole thing circularly, there's no justification of slavery.
Okay, so you're correct, because what I'm saying is, okay, let me ask this, just kind of, let me just say something, and then I'll allow the kosher clinician to respond. So you were summoned and you were asked to defend the whole, okay, it's all positive. And you said, yes, these things are there, but even if you look at it in context, it's actually still a liberating thing, because take, for example, the slavery thing, it is basically telling you, well, how to get the best outcomes possibly, especially with this kind of a framework of, well, don't pick up the sword, right? Yeah, perhaps you want to do this, but it never said that this was a good situation, right? It never said, oh, this is a great thing that you're a slave, okay? Or that it's a great thing for people to go and enslave other people. But correct so far?
Yeah, so the responsibilities, especially in, let's say, in the Matthew verses that they may have used, is still on the The slaver, there's no mentioning, say, hey, you can enslave anyone. That's not mentioned in the New Testament at all. The onus is on the slave in order for them to survive. It's a pragmatism, right? Let's say, for example, you are you and young sir over here are violent robbers who are coming into a bank and trying to steal the money. There's two ways to act in this situation. You can either do the usual shock response of getting angry and saying, you monster, you get crazy this, antagonizing the person that has power over you. Or you can simply comply, be really nice, and be like, hey, build a relationship and a rapport with them. It's about wisdom. That whole mention there is just a Solomonic type of situation. Utilize wisdom. Now, if you do have the case to escape, of course, again, utilize discernment and wisdom. But the idea that you have an overwhelming force that is literally stopping you from breathing, that you can survive that and escape from that, that is obviously lack of wisdom. So utilize wisdom and discernment where you can. Now, the person that treats that robber or the psychopath really well, guess what? They're most likely than not, compared to the other people, call the psychopath a monster, able to utilize that to their advantage. So I would say it's more of a wisdom-esque sentiment there.
Our special, our guest of honor, our kosher clinician. Any thoughts, rejoinders? What you got to say?
Well, listen. I think you can't conflate the two, shallow slavery with the slavery of the past. Slavery is not endemic to the American fabric. Slavery actually supersedes. There were times when great kings and great pharaohs of Egypt that were Nubian actually enslaved others. We get caught up in the anthropology of slavery as it relates to the American fabric. But slavery is nothing new. But the slavery actually in the Bible time was not a slavery of what I call it was not a slavery of gross atrocity, which more or less made men 3/5 human. But it was a slavery more or less based on manumission, where the person's culture was still intact. The Jews, when they were enslaved, the culture was intact, and their religion was still intact. And normally, under many cultures, after 7 years, it was called indentured servitude. They got manumission. But most slaves in America, it was the worst or the harshest form of slavery. So I don't think that slavery is congruent based on the concept or the ideal of slavery. Slavery looked different to different cultures in different times, but the slavery impacted upon people of color was atrocious. When a man is reduced to less than an animal, other cultures they weren't reduced to that. And I stand firm in my convictions about how many in the past were actually castigated or pushed aside because of the hue of their skin. And so some will argue that God never justified slavery, but there are versions of scriptures in the Bible where it was allowed. But once again, when we look at God through our own limited eyes, we become fools of chaos. God said, my thoughts are not your thoughts and my ways are not your ways. God allowed many things in the past, not because it was part of his divine will, but because he gave man free will, he allowed man to do certain things. Slavery definitely is wrong. It is an atrocity. It is an evil. But I don't think any slavery can compare to the slavery impacted upon Black people for the last 200 to 300 years. Even the Jews were not treated as harshly as Black people. Black people have been through a lot of post-traumatic slavery disorder, and not to be victims, because I don't believe in the victimization of the past. But we must not, it would be remiss to assume that Black people have not been victims of the atrocities of not only Jim Crow racism, but shallow slavery. But there's a balm in Gilead that heals the soul of man. But unfortunately, that spiritual, what I call that spiritual nexus, is missing because the current and modern day preacher does not amplify the power of the truth and the power of prayer and the gospel.
So, Dr. Polymath, did you have a question regarding everything that we've been saying so far regarding the project of mental health, the project of the good life, the project of getting certain outcomes, the neglect, the social neglect that was mentioned, and the missing of the spiritual dimension, if that, generally speaking, is a part of, partial list of the premises that we're working with. But did you have anything else to add to the conversation, sir?
Yeah, it might not be so clean as a question, but it's a statement that warrants a response, I guess. is that, especially in the West, so I'm including America, Canada, UK, etc., is that how effective is Western-based practices of therapy in relation to a people that have a music culture that is that is characterized by spiritualism? Because obviously, if the spiritual aspect, I think, is not fulfilled, how effective could the sort of mental mental instigation and sort of exploration without the spiritual exploration? Because if I go to any native or African sort of community, you see that there's a huge spiritual thing that goes on. And yes, so basically, question here is how likely is it that therapy can sort of inculcate that spiritualism while it not going down the woo thing too much, still sort of being accredited, but including it and basically tailoring it especially for Black men?
Okay, excellent question. Well, listen, as I said earlier, that inculcation is very viable. Once again, therapy is more or less, so basic treatment modalities are more or less tied into what's called empiricism. And empiricism is the volume of evidence that more or less substantiates a purpose. But however, there's a concept called the phenomenological argument that supersedes empiricism. Carl Jung actually used some of those branches in therapy, but they were more of the esoteric, like astral projection, something I don't believe in because it goes into the dark arts. But you can actually, the Bible actually amplifies some of the edicts of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a treatment model, is universally used. See, a lot of these modern day pioneers of therapy were more or less centered through the Eurocentric lens. But the gospel say, whatever a man think, that's what he is. So CBT is based on what I call a triangle. Thoughts impact feelings, feelings impact behaviors. What a man think, that's what he is. So yes, you can, therapy is just what I call, it's a silo. But what you put in that silo will determine the outcomes of the individual. So you can blend and infuse, if you believe in the African religions, something I don't necessarily believe in, but I do respect it. But you can infuse that, you can infuse Christianity, you can infuse whatever you want to pull in it. Therapy is like the pipe, it's like the pipe, or it's the vapor, the vapor. But what you put in that vapor and what you blow out is the outcome. So it depends on what you put in it, but you have to be very good. There's the art of therapy, and there's the science of therapy. Many people know the art of therapy, Dr. Polymath, but they do not understand the science of therapy, but they do not understand the art or the application of that art as it relates to the treatment model that many people use. So that takes a special person, a special gift to do that. Many people can't do it. They have become educated, but they do not know how to apply it, because that is a dimension of something called critical thinking. And most people are not critical thinkers. They're lazy intellectuals.
Okay, so the art of it, which generally speaking sometimes can even be more challenging than the science of something.
Right.
So, well, Dr. Polymath, let me ask you: do you what do you have to say about that? That it can be done. This is a silo. This is a delivery method. It's a medium, if you will. What you put into it can be done by you, but there is an art, I suspect, to how you mix it in, right? I'm sure that's kind of like the art part, right? And that, but people are not critical thinkers and so on and so forth. Any thoughts on that, Polymath?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so young brother has explained it, and I think it makes sense to me that it can be done. I guess my thoughts now is how can it be done in a wide enough scale to impact change to a large enough group of people? Because as you said, if it requires an art, very few people can critically think and sort of, look at the specificities of what the individual requires to actually change. Then the other question I guess I have is, why is it that therapy in general, I know you can get specialized ones, but don't focus on actually allowing the therapist to actually be involved in the healing process? Because I think if someone actually knows and can objectively look at your life and based on what you've told them, if they can actually comment more and guide you a bit more, again, allowing you to still kind of process things, wouldn't that be more effective than just sort of being a facilitator in a more passive manner?
Is he asking me that or asking Ike?
Yeah, I think he's asking you. Let me.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I was gonna say, I was gonna perhaps kind of just make sure that we have the question clearly on the table, which is basically saying that there seems to be more of a barrier between in other words, a barrier, or shall we say handcuffs or restrictions as to what exactly the therapist is allowed to do / participate in when it comes to the healing of the patients, right? And perhaps what are your thoughts on that? And is there need for more loosening of that? Dr. Polymath says participating in the actual healing or something. Yeah, but anyways,
Excellent question. So listen, Dr. Polymath, there are social forces and social factors that more or less impede the efficacy of therapy. Once again, most Western therapy is more or less funneled through the Eurocentric framework. Now listen, the treatment models are very salient and they are empirically sound because they have been substantiated by research. But however, once again, the art or the application of those treatment models is contingent upon the person given the administration of it. Existentialist therapy, Gestalt therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, logotherapy, narrative therapy. You have to know how to flex it. You have to know how to scaffold it. A lot of people don't know how to do it because they don't understand the human element. But me, myself, I know how to flex it. I know how to look at the theoretical underpinnings and flex it into real world outcomes. Now watch this. The prophet Jesus, some call the Messiah, said when he went to his disciples, he said he spoke in parable. So he had to speak in parable to convey the richness of the gospel. If he had used the language of the esoteric, many would have not understood. Hold tight. My computer's about to shut down, guys. Hold tight. Give me 1 minute.
Okay.
Give me 1 minute.
No problem. We got, I think, a very salient question here. You can drop out and drop back in. But there is a question also here, and perhaps we can start talking about it on the super chat. And thank you very much for the other super chat. Very, very kind, Mr. Or Doctor, shall I say? Not Mr. I should be looking.
So back to what I was saying. The great teacher Paul said, "I have become all things to all men, that I might win some to the mercies of the gospel." Paul spoke with the Epicureans in the book of Acts. He spoke also with the Stoics. But he became all things to all men, meaning he understood their philosophical underpinnings, but at the same time, he was able to flex it through the art of theology to convince those men on Mars Hill that there was someone greater outside the contextual framework of themselves.
Okay, perfect segue here.
Right,
perfect segue, because you're talking about Paul, okay, and Paul had to go out there and be amongst the Greeks and the Gentiles and the this and the that and kind of combine this and say, hey, it's okay if you allow them to do this, and what if they do it? What if they're not kosher? What if they're that? Great kind of stitching going on by my man Paul. But within that context, there's this question down there about, let's say, spirituality, African spirituality. You touched upon it and you said, okay, not particularly your thing, but you respect it, so on and so forth. Now, how would you finesse that in? Let's say someone is coming in and saying, okay, well, but I think we need more African spirituality, and I need to talk about Ogun and Shango and
right. Well, listen.
Okay.
Well, I have friends that believe in that. Some believe in Ogun, the Orishas. They believe in that. But Paul said behind every idol is a spirit. The prophet Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man come to me but by the Father." So we must ask ourselves the question, was Jesus a liar? Was he a lunatic, as in the words of C.S. Lewis, or was he God? The Bible said that Lucifer is the god of this age, and he causes confusion to many. So there are many good, honest people that believe in what they believe in. But I must believe the report of the Lord. The gospel says, if they bring to you a gospel, whether it be an angel, based on what I've not preached, call them a curse. So, listen, people believe what they want to believe. I don't trip on it. That's what they want to believe. That's between them and God. I respect the African religions. But a lot of times those edicts or those icons, the Bible actually says it goes back to idolatries, So it's a very complex and a very nuanced situation. I understand that most people don't embrace most churches now, because most churches, even though I grew up, in the church, I grew up Church of God in Christ, Pentecostal holiness. I don't go to church now because most churches now are very contaminated. They're contaminated with worldliness and secularization. But I believe in the saliency of the gospel if you apply it correctly. Unfortunately, many don't. And I understand why people are looking for parallel religions outside of, traditional Western Christian religion. So I understand it.
So, and I'm going to ask Dr. Polymath what he thinks about this, and we'll circle around and kind of start landing this plane. But generally speaking, there is an idea, while I just put some thoughts on the table here, there is an idea of, well, stand for something is better than, not, the whole stand for something or you fall for anything. And that perhaps the standing has importance in and of itself. And what you stand for is also of importance. But that you stand for something is better than not standing for anything. Now, perhaps before we go to Dr. Polymath, and perhaps you see what I'm saying here, would you give someone respect, say, you know what, at least they stand for something, or is the rightness of the thing that is being stood for the main thing, and it doesn't matter whether you stand or fall for anything, as long as if it's not the right thing, then you guys are all in the same category. And that's to the kosher clinician.
Oh, I thought you were asking Dr. Polymath that. Are you asking me that or Dr. Polymath? Me or Dr. Polymath?
Yeah, how important is it that they stand for the right thing?
It's very important. There's an old saying that if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And so it's important for people to stand firm on their convictions. And so I think it's very important for men to have a foundation or epigenesis to whatever they believe in. Those people that often don't have an epigenesis, and that's more or less substantiated in your core value system. So yes, it's important to have a stand on something. When the winds of time and the winds of adversity come, he that stood on the rock of his salvation was sustainable. So yes, I think standing on your convictions is very important, because we live in a time where people are actually fragile, fickle, and capricious. They vacillate too much. They don't stand on a position. So I think it's very important. Yes, sir.
Right, got you. Yeah, the standing, and I think we touched upon the postmodernism, which causes the fragmentation and so on and so forth. Now, so Mr. Dr. Polymath, I should say. Thoughts on Jonathan. How about that? How about I call you Jonathan?
I'm not Brianville. But good question here. Okay, so the question here is I'll be technical, right? I'm a technician, apparently. So let me be technical here. Christianity is an African religion. Israel is on the tectonic plate of Africa, so that would literally make it an African religion. And right. Yeah, so I would answer that to the sister, Dr. Omolola. Yeah, so Christianity is actually African, and some of the oldest Christian traditions is from Ethiopia, which is very African.
Right. But she's talking about Western Christian, like the Nigerians or the Irrationals. Right. She's not talking about, like you're correct, the first purveyors of the gospel were actually from Aksum in Ethiopia. You have Jews called the Falasha of Ethiopia. You also have the Lemba of Zimbabwe, right? But they practice the Judeo-Christian fabric, not animism. Animism. Animism is totally different than the kosher aspect of religion. It's two different competing frameworks.
Yeah, I would actually argue that, if you want to be more African, I would say let go of the sort of Pentecostal type Christianity that is more westernized, because these, or let's say Lutheranism, all these westernized fabrications. If I was honest, I would say just go Orthodox, then build from there, from your foundation, and figure out what you think makes sense to you, and rebuild that. If you don't want to have that sort of westernized feel that you think is corruption. And in case of like Osun and Ogun and all these other false gods, I would say at the end of the day,
that's fired. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
If you don't want, there is a way to escape this logically, and the way is you escape this. You don't even have to focus on Jesus. You can believe in Jesus and as the savior, but what you can do is you can focus on worshiping the Most High. Now, if the Most High really is Oshun, that's fine. If the Most High is Yahweh, that's fine. It doesn't really matter. The point is you're worshiping the Most High. So whoever that is, you can never be wrong, and you're covered.
I like it. And it is a technical stance, but beyond technical, it is, after all, in all kinds of ancient religions that, and also in our modern common sense, that to claim to know what the Most High is, his name, his attributes, whatever, right? It's kind of foolhardy, right?
Well,
Right.
that's very vague, Ike and Dr. Polymap, and that's why I say, I don't want to get contentious with religion. I love you, brothers. I love the intellectual conversation. But once again, in the New Testament, Jesus said, if you try to come in any other way, you're the same as a thief and a robber. He clearly said it. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. So if you believe in it, you can't say that, because then you compress Jesus into what I call a psychic fruit parade. He can't be amalgamated into these amalgams of ideas. Either he is Messiah or he's not. And if he's not in your worldview, then so be it. I listen. I tell people, believe what you want to believe. I know what I believe. I might not live it 100%. If I die tonight and be lost, I know why. But I grew up in that framework. So either he is Messiah, based on what C.S. Lewis said. He's either a liar, he's a lunatic, or he's God. But he can't be what I call this spiritual amalgamation, or this spiritual, what I call puri, or when we just make him analogous or some type of avatar, what I call a psychic avatar of anything to any man. That's almost like if I took Ike, say I'm Ike Ogaimien. I hope I said your name correctly. And I say, well, Ike can be white, he can be black, he can be Jewish, he can be a rabbit, he can be a chicken, he can be a squirrel. Well, no, he's Ike. He's either Ike or he's a fragment or he's a liar. So, whose report shall you believe?
So Dr. Polymath there, and I think that, and I think that's a fair point, kosher clinician. Because Dr. Polymath, you were doing something there where you were like, even if you don't do this, you could just do that, right? And I think you took your technicianhood too far. It's almost like Pascal's wager, right? That kind of a thing where you're like, well, you could kind of bargain this and that, and those things. Or let me put it to you, Dr. Polymath. What do you think about Pascal's wager and all these other kinds of ways to intellectualize the question, right?
Yeah, so before I go directly into Pascal, I want to respond to that point there. Yeah, I think actually that is a very salient response to what we said there. Okay, I guess what I can say is obviously I agree with you in the relation to Jesus personally, right? That's a personal thing. But in general, I guess what I want to do is I want to focus on the points where you can definitely agree with the person, in the sense that the Most High is the Most High. You agree with that, right?
Well, it depends on who you more or less qualify as the Most High.
Yahweh?
Right. Well, once again, if he's Yahweh of the Judeo-Christian edict that the black Ethiopians more or less worship, the Igbo of Nigeria, then he's that Yahweh. But if he's some fictitious Yahweh that's all things to all men, then I would say I have great consternation with that. The gospel said, let God be true and let every man be a liar. So either God is God or he's not. So see, the problem is, the Bible said that God said, my thoughts are not your thoughts and my ways are not your ways. Paul said that the carnal-minded man, which is of the flesh, cannot understand the spiritual truths of God. Many men try to contextualize God through the logic of rationale and philosophy, instead of allowing the Spirit of God to open up the dimensions of who God is. So many people come in already broken because they try to see God through the framework of the flesh. The flesh will deceive you. As Paul said, no confidence do I put in the flesh, because it often deceives men. But when you do it through the admonition and the guidance of the great Spirit, which is the Holy Spirit, then you have clarity and peace. And that's what's wrong with many churches and many philosophers, because they try to do it through God. But Paul said that you become a fool. Not you, I'm not saying you're a fool, but they become fools because professing themselves to be wise, they became fools because they tried to see God through the contextual framework of their fickle imagination, which led to error. So
it's a very interesting point there.
Right. Well, listen, man. You know, I'm an intellectual like you guys. I love this intellectual inquiry. It's stirring up my Leo juices. You know, you got my man Ike over there. He's an Aries, so he's full of fire. So, but I'm a Leo. You know, we're the kings. We're the kings of kings. So, you know, we got that Leo swag. But I love Ike. I love Ike stirring up my intellectual juice. I like that. You know, he brought out that side of me that I like, and also you too, Dr. Polly, man. You're very incognito, but
It's an incognito.
Yeah, the black, I mean, it's black. It is a black screen that you show there. Inconspicuous black screen is incognito.
Obfuscated. You know, he's incognito, but that's all good though. Much love.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Polymath, and then go ahead.
Yeah. So the response I'd like to make there is that I generally agree with those sentiments, especially with the revelation through Paul's writings and everything. I guess the question I have here is that, in a way, God will judge every man, woman, etc., based on their particular the truth as an objective status and also the particularities of their experiences. Mm-hmm. But is it not better to not alienate some of these people who come from certain backgrounds by, again, not telling them falsities? So don't tell them that Jesus is not the way or the truth, but just say, okay, at the very least, we can agree that there is a force or being called the Most High. The Most High, you can call him Yahweh and, you know, give him biblical names, and this is his attributes, and say, okay, at the very least, this is the God. Jesus is God's son, or, you know, God in other ways, however you want to conceptualize that. But just say, look, just
you're trying
follow
to ease them through a
High.
program. You're trying to
right.
It seems like
smuggle Jesus in.
You're trying to do a small, and I don't think the cultural clinician likes smuggling. I think he wants to go direct. I don't know. Let me allow him to speak again for you.
I don't think you can smuggle Jesus in. I call it the great obfuscation. You know, you can't smuggle him in. You know, when Moses went to God and when he was on Mount, he was at, I think, Mount Hebron or Mount Ararat. He said, when I go back to the people, he said, who am I to tell them that sent me? And he said, tell them that I am, that I am. And at that time, there were many gods of many different backgrounds. But he said that I am the great I am. And some called that, I believe I don't know if it's called Jehovah or Yahweh. But he was clearly distinguished from the gods of that current time. He said he was the God of all gods. And so I don't think you can smiggle God.
Yeah.
You know, I don't
that
think
would be Yahweh. Right.
I don't think you can, you know, a term I call smiggling. I don't think you can smiggle God in this, what I call this fruit parade of gods. You know, he stands outside alone because according to theology, you know, the teachings are that the many gods that you more or less see are actually the deception of the fallen one called Lucifer. And he presents many gods to many men for the deception of the soul. So, but that's what I believe. So, like I said, you know, I love this conversation, very poignant conversation, very intellectual. And, you know, I love the fact that, you know, we're having a civil discourse because, you know, religion can be very contentious. Some people, you know, they act stupid. They can come to berating. But I like the fact that we're having a civil, cogent debate free of disrespect. So I'm grateful for you and for Ike for having this conversation. So I'm grateful.
Indeed. Now, I'm going to ask, but first, we're about to draw this to a close. Don't want the... And we should have a future conversation for sure.
Oh, no doubt.
I want this to go on too long. I know you're in the East Coast and everything.
Yes, sir.
And so if you recall, the whole point of me coming here, or the whole point of this conversation, started out with the idea that we have ends that we're trying to meet. We have outcomes we're trying to see, behavior-wise, state-wise, mental state, and so on and so forth. That it's an engineering project. Right. And therefore, we have to bring in these yardsticks, right? And over time, we have layer by layer cooked up, or shall I say, I now understand from you what your yardsticks are, right? Beginning again from the introspection, shadow work, all that kind of stuff. Why do people not look there, so on and so forth? Spirituality being neglected, the social neglect, blah, blah, blah. And then all the way down to the spiritual framework, and also not to belittle it, but the even with the mythopoetic axis of, you know, Judeo-Christian, that is, right? So, and I think that it is a nice building of an edifice that was done. So glad to continue the conversation. But
No doubt,
Dr.
no doubt.
Polymath, a last word from your end, just closing remarks, and then we'll go to close it out with the kosher clinician.
Yeah, so I think it was a great chat, and I appreciate the brother for coming in and dropping a lot of gems, especially because I know some brothers who have suffered from, aspects of racism. They can't go to the general therapist to actually even begin to understand this, because it tends to be non-responsive. Either they just listen and don't say anything, which is not really pointful, or they don't have the kind of understanding to be able to kind of break it into a certain aspects and then inculcate that into like a general sphere of how then to process as a man and heal as a man. And I think everything that you're saying about the arts, that's the thing I think that was missing, is understanding that there is a way to actually flow and integrate these evidence-based practices. And it's, as opposed to just sort of thinking that, oh, it's either bad or good. It's you broke that nicely. You kind of just mentioned that the framework, that how you actually look at the lens, that's what was broken, the Eurocentrism. But the actual evidence practice is the same. I think that was actually a really good salient point. And I think as we go further on, I'm going to try to develop this a bit more and see how that can take us further.
Right. Well, listen, I started this process, as I told Ike earlier, out of a process called sublimation, which is a healthy form or a healthy ego defense mechanism. The kosher clinician is an amalgamation, also the man who chronicles, which is anonymous to clinical group therapy. As you know, and I know, most men, because of liberal policies, because of feminism, a lot of time are chided, as many men suffer internally. They suffer on the inside. But what I've decided to do is create an infrastructure, or what I call a synthetic barbershop, that allow men to tell their story and their pain free of condemnation. And so I based it on being kosher, which is organic, GMO free, and it's pure. But it's based on 7 core principles. In Hebrew, the 7 is the skava. If it's not 7, it's not kosher. If it's not kosher, it's not right. And those 7 core principles are family, faith, finances, female psychology, world travel, politics, and male health, physically and mental. And so when a man can more or less encapsulate all those elements, he becomes what's called an optimized male. He becomes calibrated. He almost becomes what's called a Superman. He's Superman, because now he's covered all those dimensions to mastery. But unfortunately, many men don't get through those 7 steps in order to become optimized. And so therefore, I've taken upon myself to bring in a network to challenge all men to become the best version of themselves. Many men in these spaces don't necessarily love the brotherhood. They have ulterior motives. But I have an abiding love for the brotherhood. Sure, everybody want to get, some type of compensation. But I have an abiding love for the brotherhood. And so therefore, I created the synthetic barbershop to empower men, not through the feminist theory lens, but through the black masculine lens, or this the masculine lens in period. Because many men have gone to the gravesite, Dr. Polymath and Ike, and you can hear the echoes of pain from the graveyard. But because their pains were not addressed, then therefore they suffer in silence. And shout out to the lead attorney. I love that brother. But some people don't feel that therapy is viable, but it's very viable if you more or less apply it correctly. And I understand why some people see therapy as a sham, because, but here's the thing with therapy: if you don't apply it, and if you don't own it, it does not work. The treatment models are empirically sound, but you have to apply it, and you have to apply it judiciously in order to get the desired outcomes that you want. And it goes back, Ike, to what I said earlier. Some don't understand the art of therapy. They know the science, but they don't always use the art as it relates to human dimensions. They don't know how to apply it.
Thank you very much, sir.
Right.
The question on the table: with what shall we meet the demands of our soul? The conversation that we've been having for millennia continued, and we are glad indeed to have partook, or whatever it may be, of the conversation one more time.
No doubt.
And ladies and gentlemen, I can see there, Sir Anthony has dropped in the chat again the link to the channel for the Kosher Clinician, go ahead and subscribe.
Right. Thank you.
Subscribe, hit the bell button, and push all. You know how that goes. Like, subscribe, bell button, so on and so forth. So thank you very much.
Thank you, brother.
Sir.
We must do this again. This was a pleasure, and to answer that question, as the old folks in the past said, we may not understand now, but we understand things better by and by. So it's a mystery, but it's unfolding if you continue to more or less stay in the cycle of life.
And that's a perfect way to end it, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you very much. And we are out. Going to end this with a splash. Going to end it with our regular theme song, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you to those in the chat. Thank you to those that are more listening right now live, quietly, and those participating in the chat. And thank you for those who'll be listening in the future as well. Thank you for the support, one and all. And for one last time, make sure you go ahead and subscribe to the Kosher Clinician. And with that, we are out. Peace.
In the den of iniquity, vicinity no pretty, calamity fi hit we any moment, what a pity. Tomorrow never certain, what was behind the curtain, the face of evil smirking with the shifty eyes averting. It's not a steady bubble, that either pop or topple, many will fall and stumble, let the dozers gather rubble. From LA to Colorado, Guinea to Burkina Faso, cannons will breach the towers and the troops will storm the castle. Hey, I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. With the rubble steady rising, and hearts are compromising. Convictions here are stifling, making evil appetizing. The fists are steady forming, and countenance is falling. Defenses are withdrawing, possibilities are falling. In these your circumstances, evil will make advances. Pick up your sword and lances, and be sure to take your stances. Victory is never promised, the battle is upon us. Gather the brave and honest, and the righteous in your corners.
In the morning, you got me up, all cause you need to talk. To 4 in the evening, wanna break up, say that you've had enough. I'm tired of talking, again and again, argue about everything. You are my darling, let's kiss and make up, I know you wanna touch. You call me every night, call me every day, I just wanna get you alone now. Trust me when I say